Composition techniques. As we've discussed in previous weeks, digital content is composed. Much like a painting in a frame, we think about how all the elements are placed together in mise-en-scène or structured through things like design principles for websites. So composition is very important. A basic principle of composition is alignment. You can see the comparison here between the two lots of squares, ones which are slightly skew-width and ones which are more strongly aligned to straight lines. So alignment allows the elements to be visually connected and it creates a sharper, more ordered design. So the alignment on the left is a little bit disturbing, it's a little bit unsettling, whereas on the right it feels much calmer to us. We can see that every element should be aligned with at least one other. So simple things like keeping images aligned with text helps to create a more soothing design. Balance is a very important composition principle. Visual balance occurs when elements on a page are arranged evenly over the design space, and balance implies stability. As Lander notes, very simply, balance is an equal distribution of weight. When a design is balanced, it seems to hold together, look unified, and feel harmonious. So one way we can attain balance is through symmetry, as we can see here with this butterfly being placed very much in the centre of the image. That's a symmetrical form of balance. We can also work with asymmetrical designs to create a sense of balance through equal weighting, although through different numbers of objects. So you can see here with this cute image of Susie and her clones versus Big Bad Bob, that balance is achieved in this asymmetrical composition. Similarly, balance is attained here because the brightness of the red apple draws our eye in contrast to the 3 green apples, but they're still placed in a way that gives good visual balance. We can see this principle again acting in things like promotional content on an Apple site for the iPhone, the way balance is used because we have a couple of silver phones which are larger on one side, but then on the other side we have the bright colour, so that sense of balance is achieved. Another compositional rule which you're hopefully familiar with through earlier weeks of this course is the rule of thirds. And for centuries, artists have used the rule of thirds to compose their pictures. You can use this simple technique to lay out your text and your visuals to be displayed. And as we've discussed in course sessions, you may already have noticed that this grid comes up when you're using some smartphones and other photography technology like newer cameras. It's based on an idea that we can cut the image into thirds. We can do this both horizontally and vertically, and where those lines intersect creates points of interest which we can use for dynamic compositions. You can see here that the placement of the surfer on the beach is really visually engaging because the rule of thirds has been used effectively and placed them in the top right point of interest. Similarly, when we're framing shots for films and other things, we need to think about looking room and provide some space. So the framing of the subject with the space to the left creates looking room. It creates movement. Note the subject is not framed centrally. We can see that it's almost as though there's space there. I always think it's a bit like a comic strip. Space for looking, space for talking. We can see that emphasised again there. You can see how this can be used, the rule of thirds, when we're laying out visuals and text. So of course with websites, the rule of thirds can be used. We might also use it for things like advertisements and other forms of graphic layout. Another useful composition rule is the golden ratio. Now, essentially with this, don't worry too much about the maths behind it, but the idea is that things can be doubled over time and to create an engaging effect. We can see 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 5 is 8. We can see how that ratio grows over time, and it's famously known through things like the Fibonacci spiral. You can look up more about this online if you'd like much greater detail, but for our purposes, all that's worth being aware of is that this can relate to visual imagery, to the level of detail that we might see in an image. This is an example of a dynamically composed image that is using that Fibonacci spiral with a lot of detail in the centre, moving out to much less detail off to the side. And it's based on this famous mathematical sequence, the Fibonacci sequence. You can similarly see this with this detail in this picture of a rose. Again, don't worry too much about the detail of this, except to be aware that this is another compositional technique, and perhaps Google it and look up some detail about it if you'd like to explore it more. Another important compositional principle is that of hierarchy. So we think about things like the focal point, the sequence that we want people to work through the text or work through their image, and the proportion of elements within that composition. So readers usually start at the top left corner and end at the bottom right corner in Western cultures, and in between they tend to scan. And readers tend to notice things with the most visual weight first. So we can compare this top composition, which is a bit cluttered and has a very strange direction of flow it's asking us to read through, with how much easier on the eye it is when we use hierarchy well, that takes readers through the most important information. It gives them some content that they can scan in the middle and still glean useful information from, and then finishes with important information at the end. So that's the end of this small sequence discussing composition.